The gunfire erupted without warning across the dusty Afghan valley. Sergeant Marcus Chun dropped flat against the rocky outcrop, his medical pack digging into his back as bullets whined overhead. 300 meters ahead, the special operations team he was supporting had walked straight into a Taliban ambush. Marcus pressed his radio button. Viper 6, this is document. I count at least 12 enemy positions. Your team is pinned down hard. Static crackled back. Doc, we've got multiple casualties. Commander Rodriguez is hit bad. We need you up here now. Marcus cursed under his breath. Getting to the trap team meant crossing open ground under heavy fire. But that was his job. He'd been a combat medic for 6 years, and he'd never lost a soldier under his care. He wasn't about to start now. Moving to your position, Marcus radioed back. He slung his rifle across his chest and grabbed his aid bag. The weight of medical supplies, ammunition, and water made each step harder, but he moved with practiced efficiency. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves well. They controlled the high ground on both sides of the narrow valley, creating a deadly crossfire. Marcus could see muzzle flashes from at least 15 different weapons. The special ops team was trapped behind a low stone wall that provided minimal cover. Marcus took a deep breath and sprinted toward the gunfire. Sand kicked up around his boots as enemy rounds searched for him. He zigzagged between rocks and scattered vegetation, using every piece of cover he could find. His heart pounded, but his hands remained steady. Fear was normal. Panic would get people killed. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded 20 feet to his left, showering him with debris. The blast knocked him sideways, but he kept running. Another 50 meters, and he'd reached the team's position. Covering fire, someone shouted over the radio. The trapped soldiers began returning fire with increased intensity, forcing the Taliban fighters to keep their heads down. Marcus used the distraction to cover the last distance, diving behind the stone wall just as another burst of machine gun fire raked the ground where he'd been standing. "About time, Doc," said Staff Sergeant Williams, the team's senior enlisted man. Blood streamed down his face from a shrapnel wound above his left eye. Commander took one in the chest. "He's in bad shape." Marcus crawled toward the figure lying motionless against the wall. Commander Antonio Rodriguez was a legend in special operations circles. At 38, he'd led more successful missions than most officers saw in their entire careers. His men would follow him anywhere, and he'd earned that loyalty by never asking them to take risks he wouldn't take himself. Now Rodriguez lay unconscious, his tactical vest dark with blood. Marcus quickly cut away the damaged gear and examined the wound. The bullet had entered just below the right collarbone, angling downward. Marcus checked for an exit wound and found none. The round was still inside, possibly near the lung or major blood vessels. "How bad?" Williams asked, keeping his rifle trained on the enemy positions. "Bad enough," Marcus replied, already working to control the bleeding. "He's lost a lot of blood, and the bullet's still in there. I need to stabilize him and get him out of here fast." Marcus inserted in 4-line and started pushing fluids. Rodriguez's blood pressure was dropping, and his pulse was weak and rapid. Classic signs of shock. Marcus had seen it hundreds of times, but it never got easier when it was someone you knew. The Taliban fire intensified. They'd apparently brought up reinforcements and were trying to overrun the American position. Williams coordinated the team's defensive fire while Marcus worked on Rodriguez. "We've got movement on the left flank," called out Corporal Jackson from behind a boulder 30 feet away. "Looks like they're trying to get around us." "Not happening," Williams replied. He grabbed a grenade from his vest and threw it toward the advancing fighters. The explosion echoed off the valley walls, followed by screams of pain and confusion. Marcus finished bandaging Rodriguez's chest wound and checked his other vital signs. The commander's breathing was shallow but steady. His pupils were equal and reactive, which was good news for potential head trauma. But the chest wound was still the main concern. "I need to get him back to the landing zone," Marcus told Williams. "He needs surgery, and he needs it soon." "Negative," Williams replied. "We're surrounded. The LZ is 800 meters back through open ground. You'd never make it." Marcus knew Williams was right, but staying here wasn't an option either. Rodriguez needed immediate medical attention that Marcus couldn't provide in a firefight. He activated his radio and called for helicopter support. Dust off, this is Doc Chun. I have an urgent surgical case requiring immediate evacuation. Can you get to our position? The helicopter pilot's voice crackled back over the radio. Doc, we're taking heavy fire every time we try to approach. The LZ is too hot. You need to find another way out. Marcus studied the terrain around their position. The valley floor offered no concealment for an evacuation. The hills on either side were controlled by the enemy. But there was a dry riverbed about 200 meters to the north that might provide cover for part of the journey back to a safer pickup zone. Williams, we need to move, Marcus said. I can't do anything more for the commander here, and he's going to die if we don't get him to a surgeon. Williams looked at the unconscious officer, then at his remaining men. The team had started with 8 soldiers. Now they were down to 6, with 2 wounded. Moving would mean leaving their defensive position and exposing themselves to enemy fire. What do you need? Williams asked. 3 men to carry the commander. The rest provide covering fire and watch our flanks. We move in bounds to that dry creek bed, then follow it north until we're out of the kill zone. Williams nodded. Jackson, Murphy, you're with me on the stretcher. Thompson and Davis, you cover our movement. Everyone else stays here and keeps the bad guys busy. Marcus helped fashion a makeshift stretcher from rifle slings and a poncho liner. Rodriguez remained unconscious, which was probably a blessing. Moving him was going to hurt, and the journey would be dangerous for everyone involved. The team prepared for movement while Marcus gave Rodriguez another dose of morphine and checked his bandages. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped completely. Every minute that passed reduced the commander's chances of survival. Ready when you are, Doc, Williams said. Marcus took one last look at Rodriguez's vital signs. His pulse was weak, but steady, and his breathing remained stable. It would have to be good enough. Move, Marcus ordered. The 4 men lifted the stretcher and began moving toward the creek bed. The remaining soldiers provided covering fire, their rifles chattering steadily as they engaged multiple enemy positions. The Taliban fighters responded with increased intensity, apparently realizing that something important was happening. Marcus ran alongside the stretcher, one hand on Rodriguez's wrist to monitor his pulse, the other gripping his rifle. Bullets snapped through the air around them, but the covering fire was working. The enemy couldn't take careful aim while ducking American rounds. They reached the creek bed without casualties and dropped into the protective depression. The dry stream bed was deeper than it had looked from their previous position, providing good concealment from most enemy positions. Keep moving north, Marcus directed. We need to get at least 500 meters away before we call for pickup. The team moved as quickly as possible while carrying the wounded commander. The creek bed twisted and turned, providing natural concealment, but also slowing their progress. Behind them, the sound of gunfire continued as their teammates kept the Taliban fighters occupied. Rodriguez stirred briefly as they navigated around a large boulder. His eyes opened, unfocused and confused. Easy, sir, Marcus said. You're hit, but you're going to be okay. We're getting you out of here. Rodriguez tried to speak, but only managed a weak whisper. Marcus leaned closer to hear. The files, Rodriguez said weakly. Don't let them, the files. What files, sir? Marcus asked, but Rodriguez had lost consciousness again. Williams looked at Marcus with concern. What was he talking about? I don't know, Marcus replied. Probably just confused from blood loss and pain medication. But something about Rodriguez's words bothered Marcus. The commander had seemed urgent about whatever files he was referring to. It wasn't the rambling of a delirious patient. There had been purpose in his voice. They continued moving north along the creek bed. After 15 minutes, the sound of gunfire behind them began to fade. They'd put enough distance between themselves and the ambush site to risk calling for helicopter extraction. Marcus activated his radio. Dust off, this is Doc Chun. We've moved to a new position about 800 meters north of the original contact. Can you reach us here? Copy, document. We're inbound to your new position. Pop smoke when you hear our rotors. Roger, smoke ready. The team found a relatively open area where a helicopter could land safely. Marcus checked Rodriguez's condition again. His blood pressure was still low, but stable. The bleeding had mostly stopped, which was encouraging. If they could get him to a field hospital within the next hour, he had a good chance of survival. The distinctive sound of rotor blades approached from the south. Marcus pulled the pin on a smoke grenade and threw it into the open area. Purple smoke began billowing up, marking their location for the incoming helicopter. The UH-60 Black Hawk came in fast and low, its door gunners scanning for threats. The pilot flared hard, bringing the aircraft to a hover just above the rocky ground. Medical personnel jumped out before the wheels touched down. "What do we have?" shouted the flight medic over the noise of the rotors. "Male, 38 years old, gunshot wound to the right chest," Marcus replied, helping to load Rodriguez onto a proper stretcher. "Possible pneumothorax, significant blood loss, currently stable but needs immediate surgery." The flight medic nodded and began his own assessment as they loaded Rodriguez into the helicopter. Marcus climbed in beside them, unwilling to leave his patient until he was safely in the hands of the surgical team. "You did good work, Doc," the flight medic said as the helicopter lifted off. "This guy's lucky you were there." Marcus nodded, but didn't reply. He was thinking about Rodriguez's words about files. What could be so important that a severely wounded man would mention it before losing consciousness? The flight to the field hospital took 20 minutes. Rodriguez remained stable throughout the journey, though he didn't regain consciousness. The surgical team was waiting when they landed, and Rodriguez was rushed into the operating room within minutes. Marcus cleaned his equipment and restocked his medical supplies, then sat down to complete his casualty report. It was a routine part of being a combat medic, but tonight something felt different. Rodriguez's words about files kept echoing in his mind. 3 hours later, the surgeon emerged from the operating room. "Your patient is going to make it," he told Marcus. "The bullet missed his lung but nicked a major artery. We were able to repair the damage and remove the round. He'll be in intensive care for a few days, but he should make a full recovery." Marcus felt relief wash over him. Saving lives was why he'd become a medic, and losing a patient always hurt, especially someone like Rodriguez, who had earned the respect of everyone who served with him. "Can I see him?" Marcus asked. "He's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but you can go in for a few minutes." Marcus entered the intensive care unit and found Rodriguez connected to multiple monitors and for lines. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was reassuring after the chaos of the firefight. A nurse was adjusting one of the 4 bags when Rodriguez's eyes suddenly opened. He looked around confused until he spotted Marcus. "Doc," Rodriguez said weakly. "You saved my life." "Just doing my job, sir," Marcus replied. Rodriguez grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "Listen carefully," he whispered. "In my personal effects, there's a flash drive. It's hidden in the false bottom of my shaving kit. You need to get it before anyone else does." "Sir, you should rest," Marcus said. "We can talk about this later." "No," Rodriguez insisted. "There are people who will kill to get that drive. Files about operations that never officially happened. Names, dates, everything. If it falls into the wrong hands." "What operations?" Marcus asked. Rodriguez's eyes began to close again as the medications took effect. "Black sites. Interrogations. Things that could destroy careers and start wars if they ever became public. Promise me you'll get that drive." "I promise," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure he understood what he was agreeing to. Rodriguez squeezed his arm once more, then lost consciousness again. The nurse shooed Marcus out, explaining that the patient needed rest. Marcus walked back to his quarters, his mind racing. What had Rodriguez gotten himself involved in? And what was Marcus supposed to do with information that could apparently start wars? He decided to sleep on it. Maybe in the morning, Rodriguez would be feeling better and could explain things more clearly. But as Marcus lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just become much more complicated. The next morning brought disturbing news. Rodriguez had been transferred during the night to a military hospital in Germany. No explanation was given, and when Marcus asked about the transfer, he was told it was classified information. Even more troubling was the news that Rodriguez's personal effects had already been collected and shipped back to the United States. Marcus had missed his chance to retrieve the flash drive that Rodriguez had mentioned. But as Marcus gathered his own gear for a mission briefing, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Two men in civilian clothes were asking questions about Rodriguez around the base. They claimed to be from Army Criminal Investigation Division, but something about them didn't feel right. Marcus had worked with CID investigators before, and these men were different. They moved like operators, not investigators. Their questions focused on what Rodriguez might have said after being wounded, not on the circumstances of the ambush. One of them approached Marcus directly. "Sergeant Chun, I'm Agent Morrison from CID. I understand you treated Commander Rodriguez after he was wounded." "That's correct," Marcus replied carefully. "Did he say anything unusual during treatment or evacuation? Anything that seemed out of place for a wounded soldier?" Marcus thought about Rodriguez's urgent words about files and flash drives. Something told him not to mention them to these men. He was mostly unconscious. Marcus lied. When he was awake, he was asking about his men and the mission status. Normal stuff. Morrison studied Marcus's face carefully. "You're sure about that? Nothing about files or documents?" The specific question confirmed Marcus's suspicions. These men knew about the flash drive. They weren't investigating Rodriguez. They were looking for something specific. "I'm sure," Marcus said firmly. Morrison handed him a business card. "If you remember anything else, please contact me immediately. This is a matter of national security." After the men left, Marcus examined the business card. It looked official, but when he called the CID office later, they had no record of anyone named Morrison working there. Marcus realized he was in serious trouble. Rodriguez had been right about people killing for the information on that flash drive. And now those same people knew that Marcus had been alone with Rodriguez after he was wounded. That evening, Marcus was approached by another stranger. This time it was a woman in army dress uniform with the rank of major. "Sergeant Chun, I'm Major Sarah Patterson from the Inspector General's office," she said. "I need to speak with you privately about Commander Rodriguez." Marcus followed her to a quiet corner of the base dining facility. Patterson looked around carefully before speaking. "Rodriguez was working for us," she said quietly. "He was investigating unauthorized operations being conducted by a rogue element within Special Operations Command. The flash drive he mentioned contains evidence of war crimes and illegal activities." "How do you know what he mentioned?" Marcus asked suspiciously. "Because I was his contact," Patterson replied. "He was supposed to deliver that evidence to me after his last mission. When he was wounded, he couldn't complete the handoff." "The men who came asking questions today weren't really CID, were they?" Marcus said. Patterson shook her head. "They work for the people Rodriguez was investigating. They know he had evidence against them, and they're trying to contain the damage." "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked. "Rodriguez's personal effects were intercepted before they could be shipped home," Patterson explained. "But he was smart. He made copies of the most important files and hid them in multiple locations. We think he may have given you something or told you where to find something." Marcus thought carefully. Patterson seemed more credible than the fake CID agents, but he had no way to verify her story either. Rodriguez had trusted him with information about the flash drive, but he'd also warned that people would kill for it. "He didn't give me anything," Marcus said finally. "And if he had, I'm not sure I'd know who to trust with it." Patterson nodded. "That's smart. Trust is in short supply in this situation. But consider this. Rodriguez risked his life to expose corruption and illegal activities. He believed the evidence was important enough to die for. Don't let his sacrifice be meaningless." She handed Marcus a secure phone. "When you're ready to do the right thing, call the number programmed into this phone. But be careful. The people Rodriguez was investigating have resources and connections at the highest levels." After Patterson left, Marcus sat alone in his quarters, staring at the phone. He'd joined the army to serve his country and save lives. Now he was being asked to risk everything to expose crimes committed by his own military. But Rodriguez had trusted him. The commander had risked his own life countless times for his soldiers, and now he was lying in a hospital bed because he'd tried to do the right thing. Marcus made his decision. He would find out what Rodriguez had discovered, and he would make sure the truth came to light, even if it cost him everything. The next morning, Marcus requested emergency leave to visit his wounded commander in Germany. His request was approved, but he noticed extra security around his quarters and unfamiliar faces watching his movements. As he prepared for the flight to Germany, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple medical follow-up. But Rodriguez had saved his men countless times over the years. Now it was Marcus's turn to save Rodriguez by completing the mission he'd started. The plane lifted off from Afghanistan as the sun set over the mountains. Marcus stared out the window at the hostile landscape below, knowing that the real danger wasn't from the enemy fighters in those hills. The real danger was from the people who were supposed to be on his side. The military transport plane touched down at Ramstein Air Base in Germany just as dawn was breaking. Marcus Chun had spent the 15-hour flight thinking about Rodriguez's warning and the mysterious people who were hunting for the flash drive. He still wasn't sure who to trust, but he knew he had to see Rodriguez in person. The hospital at Ramstein was a massive complex that treated wounded soldiers from across Europe and the Middle East. Marcus presented his orders to the reception desk and was directed to the intensive care unit on the 4th floor. But when he arrived at Rodriguez's room, he found it empty. "Excuse me," Marcus asked a passing nurse. "I'm looking for Commander Antonio Rodriguez. He was transferred here 2 days ago." The nurse checked her computer terminal. "I'm sorry, but I don't show anyone by that name in our system." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. That's impossible. He was flown here directly from Afghanistan. Gunshot wound to the chest. "Let me check with my supervisor," the nurse said, clearly confused by Marcus's insistence. 5 minutes later, a senior nurse approached Marcus. "Sergeant Chun, I understand you're looking for a patient who was transferred from Afghanistan." "Commander Rodriguez," Marcus confirmed. "Where is he?" "I'm sorry, but there's no record of anyone by that name being admitted to this facility. Are you sure you have the right hospital?" Marcus showed her the transfer orders he'd been given in Afghanistan. The nurse studied them carefully. "These orders are authentic," she said slowly. "But we never received this patient. The aircraft manifest shows he was supposed to arrive here, but there's no record of him actually being admitted." "That's impossible," Marcus said. "I personally loaded him onto the medevac helicopter." The flight medic confirmed his transfer orders. The nurse looked uncomfortable. "I'm going to need to report this to security. A missing patient is a serious matter." Within minutes, military police arrived and escorted Marcus to a small office where a lieutenant colonel from base security was waiting. "Sergeant Chun, I'm Colonel Harper. I understand you're looking for a patient who may have gone missing during transfer." Marcus explained the entire situation, from the ambush in Afghanistan to his arrival at Ramstein. Colonel Harper listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. "This is highly unusual," Harper said when Marcus finished. "We're going to launch a full investigation immediately. In the meantime, I need you to remain on base until we can sort this out." "With respect, sir, I need to find Commander Rodriguez. Someone made him disappear, and I think I know why." Harper leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Marcus hesitated. Rodriguez had warned him that there were people who would kill for the information on the flash drive. But Rodriguez was missing, and Marcus might be the only person who could help him now. "Rodriguez was investigating something sensitive," Marcus said carefully. "He told me there were files that certain people would do anything to suppress." "What kind of files?" Harper asked. "I don't know the details. But Rodriguez said they contained evidence of operations that never officially happened. Black sites, interrogations, things that could start wars if they became public." Harper's expression darkened. "Sergeant, you're describing classified material that's way above your security clearance. Are you sure Rodriguez told you these things?" "Yes, sir. He was worried that someone would try to suppress the evidence. That's why he made copies and hid them." Harper stood up and walked to the window. After a long moment, he turned back to Marcus. "There have been rumors," Harper said quietly. "Whispers about unauthorized operations being conducted outside normal command channels. Some people have tried to investigate, but they tend to get transferred to remote assignments or forced into early retirement. Are you going to help me find Rodriguez?" Marcus asked. "I'm going to try," Harper replied. "But you need to understand what you're getting into. If Rodriguez really was investigating a rogue operation, the people involved have serious resources and connections." Harper made some phone calls while Marcus waited. After an hour, he returned with a grim expression. "I've got some answers," Harper said. "Rodriguez's aircraft did land here as scheduled, but instead of being admitted to the hospital, he was transferred to another aircraft and flown to an undisclosed location." "On whose authority?" Marcus demanded. That's classified above my level, Harper admitted. But I was able to confirm that the transfer was not routine medical care. Someone with very high clearance wanted Rodriguez moved. Marcus felt anger building in his chest. They kidnapped a wounded soldier from a military hospital? I didn't say that, Harper replied carefully. But I will say that this entire situation smells wrong. I'm going to contact some people I trust in Washington and see what I can find out. What am I supposed to do in the meantime? Marcus asked. Stay alert and watch your back, Harper warned. If Rodriguez was right about people being willing to kill for this information, you could be in danger too. Marcus left the security office more confused and worried than before. Rodriguez had vanished from a secure military hospital, and no one seemed to know where he'd been taken. Or if they knew, they weren't talking. That evening, Marcus sat in the base dining hall, picking at his food while trying to make sense of the situation. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the woman who sat down across from him. It was Major Patterson, the woman who claimed to work for the Inspector General's office. Hello, Sergeant, she said quietly. I heard you arrived in Germany looking for Rodriguez. How did you know I was here? Marcus asked suspiciously. I've been tracking the people who are looking for Rodriguez's evidence, Patterson replied. When you requested emergency leave, I figured you might be trying to find him. Do you know where he is? Marcus asked directly. Patterson looked around the dining hall before answering. He's being held at a CIA black site about 2 hours from here. They're calling it protective custody, but he's essentially a prisoner. Why? Marcus demanded. Because he has information that could expose a massive illegal operation, Patterson explained. For the past 3 years, a small group within Special Operations Command has been conducting unauthorized missions in countries where we have no official presence. What kind of missions? Marcus asked. Assassinations, mostly. High-value targets that the official chain of command wouldn't approve. They've been using special operations teams like Rodriguez's unit to carry out these missions, then covering them up. Marcus thought about all the missions Rodriguez had led over the years. How many of them had been legitimate military operations, and how many had been part of this rogue program? Rodriguez figured it out, Patterson continued. He started documenting everything. Mission orders, target lists, communications with handlers. He was building a case to expose the entire operation. And now they have him, Marcus said. Yes, they're trying to convince him to keep quiet in exchange for his freedom. But Rodriguez is stubborn. He believes the American people have a right to know what's being done in their name. What can we do? Marcus asked. Patterson reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone. This is a GPS tracker. Rodriguez managed to activate it before he was taken. It's showing his location at a facility about 40 kilometers from here. You want me to help rescue him? Marcus asked. I want you to help me expose the truth, Patterson replied. Rodriguez risked everything to gather evidence of war crimes and illegal operations. We can't let his sacrifice be meaningless. Marcus stared at the GPS device. How do I know you're really who you say you are? For all I know, you could be working for the same people who took Rodriguez. Patterson nodded approvingly. That's smart. Trust no one until you can verify their credentials. She handed him a secure phone. Call this number and ask for Deputy Inspector General Morrison. He'll verify my identity and my mission. Marcus took the phone but didn't use it immediately. Even if you're legitimate, what you're suggesting sounds like a good way to get killed. Probably, Patterson agreed. But Rodriguez is counting on us. And if we don't act soon, he'll either be killed or forced to disappear permanently. That night, Marcus called the number Patterson had given him. After several security checks, he was connected to Deputy Inspector General Morrison. Sergeant Chun, Morrison said over the secure line. Major Patterson briefed me on your situation. What she told you is accurate. Rodriguez was investigating a rogue operation, and he's now in serious danger. Why should I get involved? Marcus asked. I'm just a medic. This is way above my pay grade. Because Rodriguez trusted you, Morrison replied. And because you took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The people Rodriguez was investigating are domestic enemies of everything the military stands for. What exactly are you asking me to do? Marcus said. Help us get Rodriguez to safety and ensure his evidence reaches the proper authorities. Major Patterson will provide the operational details. Marcus spent the rest of the night weighing his options. He could report the entire situation to his chain of command and hope they would handle it properly. But Rodriguez had warned him that the rogue operation had connections at high levels. How could he know who to trust? On the other hand, he could help Patterson attempt to rescue Rodriguez. But that would mean going up against people with serious resources and training. A combat medic wasn't equipped for that kind of operation. The next morning, Marcus made his decision. He found Patterson at the base library, reading medical journals like any other officer. "I'll help," Marcus said quietly. Patterson looked up from her magazine. "Are you sure? Once we start this, there's no going back." "Rodriguez saved my life more times than I can count," Marcus replied. "Now it's my turn to save his." Patterson nodded and closed the magazine. "Meet me at building 347 at 1800 hours. Come armed and bring your medical gear. We're going to need both." "What's the plan?" Marcus asked. "Simple extraction," Patterson said. "Get in, get Rodriguez, get out. The facility where they're holding him isn't heavily guarded because it's not supposed to exist. And if something goes wrong?" Marcus asked. "Then we'll probably end up in the same place Rodriguez is now," Patterson admitted. "Or worse." Marcus spent the day preparing his equipment and thinking about what he was about to attempt. He'd been in plenty of dangerous situations as a combat medic, but this was different. He wasn't fighting enemy soldiers. He was going up against his own military. At 1800 hours, Marcus arrived at building 347 to find Patterson waiting with a black SUV. She was dressed in civilian clothes and had traded her major's insignia for a concealed pistol. "Ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, climbing into the passenger seat. They drove through the German countryside as the sun set behind them. Patterson explained that the facility holding Rodriguez was an old East German intelligence building that had been quietly acquired by the CIA after reunification. "It's perfect for their purposes," Patterson said. "Isolated, secure, and officially it doesn't exist. They use it to hold high-value prisoners who need to disappear from the official system." "How many guards?" Marcus asked. "Intelligence suggests 4 to 6 personnel," Patterson replied. "But they won't be expecting a rescue attempt. As far as they know, nobody else knows Rodriguez is there." They drove in silence for another hour, following narrow country roads through dark forests. Finally, Patterson pulled off the main road and parked behind an abandoned farmhouse. "The facility is about 2 kilometers through those woods," she said, pointing toward a tree line. "We go in on foot from here." They gathered their equipment and began moving through the forest. Marcus carried his rifle, medical pack, and night vision goggles. Patterson had what looked like military-grade surveillance and communications equipment. After 30 minutes of careful movement, they reached a ridge overlooking the target facility. Marcus studied the building through his night vision. It was a concrete structure that looked like a Cold War bunker, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. 2 guards at the main entrance, Patterson whispered. 1 roving patrol around the perimeter. The building has 3 levels, and intelligence suggests Rodriguez is being held on the basement level. "How do we get inside?" Marcus asked. Patterson pointed to a service entrance on the side of the building. "That door leads directly to the basement level. We take out the roving guard quietly, get through the door, find Rodriguez, and extract." "What about the guards at the main entrance?" Marcus asked. "They'll be our early warning system," Patterson replied. "If we do this right, they'll never know we were here until we're gone." They waited another hour for the roving guard to establish a pattern, then made their move. Patterson proved to be highly skilled at moving silently through the darkness. She took down the roving guard with a sleeper hold that left him unconscious but unharmed. The service entrance was secured with an electronic lock, but Patterson had some kind of device that bypassed it quickly. They slipped inside and found themselves in a dimly lit corridor lined with steel doors. "Rodriguez should be in one of these rooms," Patterson whispered. They began checking each door systematically. Most of the rooms were empty, but the third door revealed a familiar figure sitting on a narrow cot. Rodriguez looked up as they entered, his face showing a mixture of surprise and relief. "Doc," he said weakly, "how did you find me?" "Long story," Marcus replied, moving quickly to assess Rodriguez's condition. The commander was pale and obviously hadn't been eating well, but he didn't appear to have been physically abused. "Can you travel?" Patterson asked. "I can manage," Rodriguez said, struggling to his feet. "Did you get the flash drive?" "That's part of the long story," Marcus said. "We'll fill you in once we get out of here." They helped Rodriguez toward the exit, but their escape was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor ahead. Patterson motioned for them to stop and drew her weapon. "This way," she whispered, leading them in the opposite direction. But as they rounded a corner, they came face to face with two armed guards who were obviously expecting them. "Drop your weapons," one of the guards ordered. "You're all under arrest." Marcus realized they'd walked into a trap. Someone had known they were coming, which meant either Patterson wasn't who she claimed to be, or their mission had been compromised from the beginning. As the guards moved to disarm them, Marcus caught Rodriguez's eye. The commander gave him an almost imperceptible nod, and Marcus understood. Whatever happened next, Rodriguez was trusting him to do the right thing. "I said drop your weapons," the guard repeated, raising his rifle. Marcus slowly reached for his pistol, but instead of dropping it, he dove sideways while bringing the weapon up. The corridor erupted in gunfire as Patterson and the guards began shooting. In the chaos that followed, Marcus grabbed Rodriguez and pulled him toward what looked like an emergency exit at the end of the hallway. Behind them, he could hear Patterson shouting orders, but he couldn't tell if she was coordinating their escape or their capture. The emergency exit led to a stairwell that went up to ground level. Rodriguez was moving slowly due to his recent surgery, but he pushed himself to keep up as they climbed the stairs. "Doc," Rodriguez gasped as they reached the ground floor. "There's something you need to know about Patterson." "What?" Marcus asked, checking the hallway before they moved. "She's not Inspector General," Rodriguez said. "She's CIA, same people who have been running the illegal operations." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. "Then, why did she help us escape?" "Because they don't want me in custody where I might talk to real investigators," Rodriguez explained. "They want me to have an accident during the escape attempt." The sound of pursuit echoed up from the stairwell behind them. Marcus realized that their escape had been orchestrated to fail. Patterson had led them into a trap, and now she would eliminate both Rodriguez and the only witness who knew about the rogue operations. "This way," Marcus said, leading Rodriguez toward what he hoped was another exit. But as they rounded a corner, Patterson appeared ahead of them, her weapon trained directly at Rodriguez's chest. "I'm sorry it has to end this way," she said calmly. "But you should have taken the deal when it was offered." "What deal?" Marcus asked, keeping his own weapon ready. "Retirement with full benefits and a promise to keep quiet," Patterson replied. Rodriguez could have lived comfortably for the rest of his life, but he insisted on being a hero. "People have a right to know when their government commits crimes," Rodriguez said defiantly. "People have a right to sleep safely at night," Patterson countered. "The operations Rodriguez wants to expose eliminated threats that could have killed thousands of Americans. We did what was necessary." "You assassinated people without due process," Rodriguez replied. "That's not justice. That's murder." Patterson's finger moved to the trigger. "Like I said, I'm sorry." But before she could fire, Marcus threw himself between Patterson and Rodriguez. The bullet meant for the commander struck Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall. "Run," Marcus shouted to Rodriguez as he tried to bring his own weapon up despite the burning pain in his shoulder. Patterson fired again, but Rodriguez had already disappeared around the corner. She turned her weapon back toward Marcus. "You just made this much more complicated," she said coldly. Marcus struggled to remain conscious as blood soaked through his uniform. "Rodriguez will expose everything now." "No, he won't," Patterson replied. "Because you're both going to die in this facility tonight. The official story will be that you were killed attempting to rescue Rodriguez from his captors." Very heroic. Marcus tried to raise his pistol, but his injured arm wouldn't cooperate. Patterson took careful aim at his head. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, casting eerie red shadows throughout the hallway. In the confusion, Marcus heard running footsteps and the sound of a struggle. When his vision cleared, he saw Rodriguez standing over Patterson's unconscious form, holding a fire extinguisher. "You okay, Doc?" Rodriguez asked, kneeling beside Marcus. "I'll live," Marcus replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. The bullet wound in his shoulder was bleeding heavily, and he was starting to feel lightheaded. "We need to get out of here now," Rodriguez said. "Patterson's backup will be here soon." Rodriguez helped Marcus to his feet, and they made their way toward what appeared to be an emergency exit. Behind them, they could hear voices and footsteps as more personnel arrived to investigate the shooting. The exit led to the building's rear parking area, where several vehicles were parked. Rodriguez hot-wired a Jeep while Marcus tried to control the bleeding from his shoulder wound. "Where do we go?" Marcus asked as Rodriguez started the engine. "Someplace where we can contact real authorities," Rodriguez replied. "People who aren't part of this conspiracy." As they drove away from the facility, Marcus wondered if such people actually existed. The rogue operation seemed to have connections everywhere, and they'd proven willing to kill to protect their secrets. But Rodriguez was alive and free, which meant there was still a chance to expose the truth. Marcus had kept his promise to help the commander, even though it had nearly cost him his life. Now they had to find a way to bring down an enemy that operated from within their own military. And they had to do it before that enemy found them again. The stolen Jeep bounced along back roads through the German countryside as dawn broke over the forest. Marcus Chun held pressure on his wounded shoulder while Rodriguez drove, constantly checking the mirrors for signs of pursuit. "We need to get you to a hospital," Rodriguez said, glancing at the blood soaking through Marcus's makeshift bandage. "No hospitals," Marcus replied through gritted teeth. "They'll be watching every medical facility within 100 miles. The bullet went through clean. I can manage it if you find me a first aid kit." Rodriguez pulled into the parking lot of a small gas station and went inside to buy supplies. Marcus used the time to assess his wound properly. The bullet had passed through the muscle of his shoulder without hitting bone or major blood vessels. Painful, but not life-threatening if he could control the infection risk. When Rodriguez returned with medical supplies and food, Marcus cleaned and dressed the wound while the commander filled the gas tank. "Where exactly are we going?" Marcus asked as they got back on the road. "Munich," Rodriguez replied. "There's someone there who might help us." "Who?" Marcus asked suspiciously. After Patterson's betrayal, he was reluctant to trust anyone. "A journalist named Klaus Weber," Rodriguez said. "He's been investigating American black operations in Europe for years. The CIA has tried to discredit him, but he's too smart and has too many sources." "A German journalist?" Marcus said. "Rodriguez, we can't give classified information to foreign nationals. That's treason." "What we know about isn't classified," Rodriguez replied. "It's illegal. The operations I documented were never authorized by Congress or even the Pentagon. They exist outside the normal chain of command." Marcus considered this as they drove toward Munich. Rodriguez was right that unauthorized operations couldn't claim legal classification status. But exposing American military activities to foreign journalists still felt wrong. "What's your backup plan?" Marcus asked. "If this Weber guy can't help us or turns out to be compromised, then we go public in the United States," Rodriguez said. "Find a reporter who specializes in national security issues and give them everything." "Everything like what?" Marcus asked. "Patterson said your personal effects were intercepted. Do you have copies of the evidence?" Rodriguez smiled grimly. "I told you I had copies in multiple locations. The flash drive in my shaving kit was just one copy. I have others." "Where?" Marcus pressed. "Safety deposit boxes in 3 different countries," Rodriguez replied. "Digital copies stored on secure servers. Physical documents hidden with people I trust. The conspiracy is thorough, but I've been planning this exposure for 2 years." Marcus felt some of his tension ease. If Rodriguez really had multiple copies of the evidence, they might have a chance of exposing the truth even if their enemies were hunting them. They reached Munich in the early afternoon and drove to a neighborhood of small apartments and shops near the university. Rodriguez parked several blocks away from their destination, and they walked the rest of the way. Klaus Weber lived in a third-floor apartment above a bookstore. He was a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and the intense eyes of someone who had spent years investigating dangerous stories. "Commander Rodriguez," Weber said in accented English as he opened the door. "I wondered when you would contact me." "You were expecting us?" Marcus asked suspiciously. "Not specifically," Weber replied, inviting them inside. "But I knew someone would eventually come forward about the illegal operations. Too many people were involved to keep it secret forever. Weber's apartment was filled with filing cabinets, computers, and walls covered with photographs and documents connected by colored string. It looked like the workspace of someone obsessed with uncovering the truth. "What do you know about the operations?" Rodriguez asked. "More than the people running them would like," Weber replied. "For 3 years, American Special Operations teams have been conducting unauthorized missions throughout Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Assassinations, kidnappings, sabotage operations." Weber pulled out a thick file folder. "I have documented evidence of at least 37 illegal missions. Most of them targeted individuals who posed no direct threat to American national security." "What kind of targets?" Marcus asked. "Journalists investigating American activities abroad. Foreign politicians who opposed U.S. policies. Business leaders who competed with American companies for strategic contracts," Weber explained. Marcus felt sick. "Those aren't military targets. Those are civilian murders." "Exactly," Rodriguez said. "That's why I started gathering evidence. The people running this operation have turned special forces into a private assassination squad." Weber showed them photographs and documents detailing specific missions. Marcus recognized some of the mission types from operations Rodriguez had led over the years, though he hadn't realized their true nature at the time. "The question is what to do with this information," Weber said. "If I publish it immediately, the story might be discredited as foreign propaganda. But if we wait too long, they might succeed in eliminating all the witnesses." "They're already trying," Marcus said, pointing to his wounded shoulder. Weber nodded grimly. "I have contacts at major American newspapers, journalists who specialize in national security and have the credibility to make this story stick. But they'll need more than documents. They'll need testimony from someone with direct knowledge." "Like Rodriguez," Marcus said. "And potentially you," Weber added, looking at Marcus. "You treated Rodriguez after he was wounded and heard his statements about the evidence. You witnessed the attempts to silence him. Your testimony could corroborate his claims." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just a medic. No one's going to believe me over senior military officers." "Don't underestimate yourself," Rodriguez said. "You have an impeccable service record and no apparent motive to lie. That makes you a credible witness." Weber's phone rang, interrupting their discussion. He answered in German, his expression growing increasingly concerned as he listened. "We have a problem," Weber said after hanging up. "My source at the American consulate says there's been unusual activity. Multiple requests for information about Americans traveling in Germany, specifically military personnel." "They're looking for us," Rodriguez said. "It gets worse," Weber continued. "My source says the requests came from people claiming to be Army Criminal Investigation Division, but they had CIA credentials when pressed for identification." Marcus remembered the fake CID agents who had questioned him in Afghanistan. "How long before they find us?" "Not long," Weber admitted. "Munich isn't that big, and there are only so many places you could go." Rodriguez stood up and began pacing. "We need to get the evidence to American journalists immediately. Do you have secure communication with your contacts?" "Yes, but transferring large amounts of data securely will take time," Weber replied. "How much time?" Marcus asked. "Several hours, possibly overnight," Weber said. Marcus looked out the window at the street below. It was starting to get dark, and he noticed a van that had been parked across the street when they arrived was still there. "We may not have that much time," Marcus said, pointing to the van. Rodriguez joined him at the window. "2 men inside. They've been there too long for coincidence." Weber grabbed his laptop and several external hard drives. "I can transmit the most critical files to my American contacts from a different location. But I'll need to leave now, before they realize what I'm doing." "What about us?" Marcus asked. "There's a back exit through the bookstore," Weber said. "The owner is a friend who helps journalists in situations like this. He'll get you out safely." Rodriguez collected his documents while Weber prepared to leave. "Where should we meet you?" Rodriguez asked. "There's a safe house about an hour south of here," Weber said, writing down an address. "Wait there until you hear from me. I'll contact you once I've transmitted the evidence." Weber left through the front door, walking casually to avoid attracting attention. Rodriguez and Marcus waited 10 minutes, then made their way down to the bookstore. The owner was an elderly man named Heinrich who spoke excellent English. "Mr. Weber called me," he said. "You need to leave quickly. There are more vehicles arriving outside." Heinrich led them through a maze of back rooms to a tunnel that connected to the building next door. "This was built during the Cold War," he explained. "We never know when such things might be useful again." They emerged in the basement of an apartment building 2 blocks away. Heinrich provided them with a different vehicle and directions to the safe house. "Be careful," Heinrich warned. "The Americans are not the only ones looking for you now. Word is spreading that someone has evidence of illegal operations. Many people have reasons to want that evidence suppressed." The safe house was a small cabin in the Bavarian hills south of Munich. It was isolated and well-stocked with supplies, clearly designed to hide people for extended periods. Marcus cleaned and rebandaged his wound while Rodriguez studied the materials they'd taken from Weber's apartment. The scope of the illegal operations was staggering. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, showing Marcus a document. "Mission authorizations signed by people who don't officially exist. Budget authorizations that bypass normal congressional oversight. This isn't just about unauthorized operations. It's about a shadow government within the military." "Who's running it?" Marcus asked. "That's what I've been trying to figure out," Rodriguez replied. "The paper trail leads to a group calling itself Strategic Operations Division. But that's not an official military unit." Marcus studied the documents Rodriguez showed him. The missions were planned and executed with military precision, but they operated outside normal command structures. "It has to be funded somehow," Marcus said. "Operations like this require serious money." "That's another puzzle," Rodriguez agreed. "The budget documents I've found suggest funding from multiple sources. Some appears to be diverted from legitimate military budgets, but there are also references to private funding." "Private funding?" Marcus asked. "Like from defense contractors?" "Possibly. Or from foreign governments who want specific targets eliminated but can't do it themselves without diplomatic consequences." The implications were staggering. If Rodriguez was right, American special operations teams were being used as mercenaries by foreign governments and private interests. Weber contacted them the next morning with mixed news. He'd successfully transmitted the most critical evidence to journalists at the Washington Post and New York Times. Both newspapers were taking the story seriously and had assigned teams of investigative reporters to verify the evidence. But Weber also reported that the hunt for Rodriguez and Marcus had intensified. German police had been asked to assist in locating 2 American military personnel suspected of stealing classified documents. "They're trying to discredit us before the story breaks," Rodriguez said after Weber's call. "Will it work?" Marcus asked. "Depends on how fast the journalists can verify our evidence and get the story published," Rodriguez replied. "If they're thorough, they'll discover that the supposedly classified documents we allegedly stole actually detail illegal operations that were never properly classified." That afternoon brought more disturbing news. Weber called to report that other witnesses had started disappearing. A CIA analyst who had questioned mission authorizations had been found dead in an apparent suicide. A Defense Department auditor who had investigated unauthorized budget transfers had been killed in a car accident. "They're eliminating everyone who knows about the operations," Rodriguez said grimly. "We need to get our story out immediately before they can silence all the witnesses." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "What if we can't prove everything? What if they manage to discredit the evidence?" "Then we'll have to live with the consequences," Rodriguez replied. "But at least we'll have tried to do the right thing." That evening, Weber arrived at the safe house with a secure laptop and satellite communication equipment. "I've arranged for you to speak directly with journalists from both newspapers," he said. "They want to hear your testimony firsthand." The interview lasted 3 hours. Rodriguez provided detailed testimony about the missions he'd led and the evidence he'd gathered. Marcus corroborated Rodriguez's account and described the attempts to silence them both. The journalists asked pointed questions about the evidence and the people involved in the illegal operations. They seemed knowledgeable about military procedures and skeptical of claims that couldn't be verified. "When will the story be published?" Rodriguez asked after the interview. "We need another day to verify some of the details," the lead journalist replied. "But assuming everything checks out, we'll run the story in tomorrow's edition." After the journalists signed off, Weber poured drinks for everyone. To tell you the truth, I wasn't sure we'd make it this far, he admitted. It's not over yet, Rodriguez warned. They'll do everything possible to prevent publication, and they'll come after us even harder once the story breaks. What's our next move? Marcus asked. We wait, Rodriguez said. If the story is published and gains traction, we'll have public attention protecting us. If it's suppressed or discredited, we'll need to disappear permanently. That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about how his life had changed so dramatically in just a few days. A week ago, he'd been a combat medic focused on saving lives in Afghanistan. Now he was hiding in a German safe house, waiting to see if he'd helped expose a massive government conspiracy. But he had no regrets about his choices. Rodriguez had risked everything to expose crimes committed by their own military. Marcus had simply honored his oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The next morning brought the news they'd been hoping for. Weber woke them early with a copy of the Washington Post's front page. The headline read, "Secret Military Unit Conducted Illegal Operations Worldwide, Documents Show." The story was detailed and damning. It described the unauthorized missions, the shadow funding, and the attempts to silence witnesses. It named specific operations and provided documentary evidence to support every major claim. They did it, Rodriguez said, reading the article with obvious relief. The story is out there. But their celebration was short-lived. Weber's phone rang with an urgent call from his contact at the American consulate. They've issued arrest warrants for both of you, Weber reported after the call. The charges include theft of classified documents, desertion, and providing aid to foreign nationals. So they're going with the discrediting strategy, Rodriguez said. It gets worse, Weber continued. They've also issued an international arrest warrant claiming you're terrorists who pose a threat to American national security. Marcus felt his heart sink. Even if the newspaper story was credible, the arrest warrants would make it difficult for people to support them publicly. What do we do now? Marcus asked. We keep fighting, Rodriguez said firmly. The story is published. Other journalists will pick it up and investigate further. Eventually, the truth will come out completely. Assuming we live long enough to see it, Marcus replied. Rodriguez looked out the window at the German countryside. Doc, I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've done. You didn't have to get involved in this. Yes, I did, Marcus said. You saved my life more times than I can count. And, more importantly, this was the right thing to do. Weber interrupted their conversation. I've been in contact with human rights organizations and civil liberties groups. They're willing to provide legal assistance and protection if you're willing to continue fighting. What kind of protection? Rodriguez asked. Safe passage to a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States, Weber replied. Temporary asylum while the legal situation is resolved. Marcus and Rodriguez looked at each other. Accepting asylum in a foreign country would mean giving up their American citizenship and military careers. But staying would likely mean arrest and possibly death. I need to think about this, Marcus said. We both do, Rodriguez agreed. But either way, we've accomplished what we set out to do. The truth is public now. As they prepared to leave the safe house for their next hiding place, Marcus reflected on the price of doing the right thing. They had exposed crimes committed by their own government. But the cost had been everything they'd worked for in their military careers. Still, Marcus knew he would make the same choice again. Some things were more important than personal consequences. The oath he'd taken to defend the Constitution wasn't just words. It was a commitment to stand up for what was right, even when it was dangerous. The battle to expose the truth was won. But the war to ensure justice was just beginning. 3 months after the Washington Post story broke, Marcus Chin sat in a small apartment in Stockholm, Sweden, watching American news coverage of the congressional hearings. The scandal had grown far beyond what he and Rodriguez had initially exposed. The Swedish government had granted them temporary asylum after human rights organizations argued that they faced persecution for exposing war crimes. It wasn't the life Marcus had imagined, but it was better than a military prison or an unmarked grave. Rodriguez joined him on the couch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The commander had lost weight during their months in hiding, but his determination remained unshaken. Senator Williams is grilling the defense secretary pretty hard, Rodriguez observed, watching the television. On screen, the Secretary of Defense was struggling to answer questions about oversight of special operations. The Congressional Committee had uncovered evidence supporting every claim Rodriguez and Marcus had made, plus additional crimes they hadn't known about. Do you think anyone will actually go to prison? Marcus asked. Some will, Rodriguez replied. Too much evidence has come out for them to sweep it all away. But the people at the very top will probably claim they didn't know what was happening. The doorbell rang, interrupting their discussion. Marcus tensed automatically. Even though they were supposed to be safe in Sweden, months of being hunted had left him constantly alert for danger. Rodriguez checked the security monitor before opening the door. A woman in her 40s stood in the hallway, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of conservative business suit that suggested government work. Commander Rodriguez? Sergeant Chen? I'm Sarah Mitchell from the U.S. State Department. I'd like to speak with you about returning to the United States. Marcus and Rodriguez exchanged glances. They'd been expecting this conversation eventually, but the timing was significant. The congressional hearings had shifted public opinion in their favor, but they still faced serious criminal charges. Come in, Rodriguez said, stepping aside to let Mitchell enter. Mitchell sat down and opened her briefcase. I'll be direct. The Attorney General has authorized me to offer you a deal. If you return voluntarily and testify fully in all ongoing investigations, the charges against you will be dropped. All charges? Marcus asked skeptically. All charges, Mitchell confirmed. The Justice Department has concluded that your actions were justified whistleblowing protected under federal law. Rodriguez leaned forward. What's the catch? No catch, Mitchell said. The president wants to send a message that people who expose wrongdoing will be protected, not prosecuted. Your case has become symbolic of the need for accountability in government. Marcus studied Mitchell's face carefully. What about the people who try to kill us? Are they facing charges? Several arrests have been made, Mitchell replied. The woman you knew as Major Patterson has been charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. Others are being investigated. What about the people running the illegal operations? Rodriguez asked. That's where your testimony becomes crucial, Mitchell explained. We have documentary evidence, but we need witnesses who can describe how the operations actually worked. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Marcus could see him weighing the offer carefully. What guarantees do we have for our safety? Rodriguez asked. Full protection under the Federal Witness Protection Program, Mitchell said. New identities, secure housing, ongoing security monitoring. We'd have to give up our military careers, Marcus realized. Not necessarily, Mitchell replied. The Army has indicated that disciplinary action would be dropped in light of your service to the country. You could return to active duty if you choose. Marcus felt a mix of hope and skepticism. The offer sounded too good to be true, which made him suspicious. Can we have some time to consider this? Rodriguez asked. Of course, Mitchell said. But I should mention that the congressional hearings are moving quickly. Your testimony would be most valuable if you can return soon. After Mitchell left, Marcus and Rodriguez spent hours discussing the offer. The prospect of returning home was appealing, but they'd learned to be cautious about trusting anyone in the government. What do you think? Marcus asked. I think the political situation has changed enough that we might actually be safe, Rodriguez replied. The scandal is too public now for them to eliminate witnesses quietly. But, Marcus prompted, hearing the hesitation in Rodriguez's voice. But, I'm worried about what happens after the hearings are over and public attention moves on to other stories, Rodriguez said. That evening, they called Klaus Weber for his assessment of the situation. The German journalist had become their unofficial advisor and one of the few people they completely trusted. The offer is probably genuine, Weber said over the secure phone line. The political cost of harming you now would be enormous. Too many people are watching. Do you think we should take it? Marcus asked. That depends on what you want for your futures, Weber replied. If you want to rebuild your lives in America, this may be your best chance. But if you're comfortable starting over somewhere else, staying in Europe might be safer long-term. Marcus realized the decision ultimately came down to whether they wanted to continue fighting or start healing. They'd accomplished their mission of exposing the truth. The question now was whether they wanted to be involved in the aftermath. I miss home, Marcus admitted to Rodriguez after the call. I miss practicing medicine and helping people. I miss feeling like I'm serving something worthwhile. Rodriguez nodded. I miss leading soldiers and knowing that what I'm doing makes a difference. They agreed to accept the State Department offer, but with conditions. They wanted to review all testimonies and documents before agreeing to testify. They wanted guaranteed protection for their families. And they wanted the right to withdraw from the agreement if the security situation changed. Mitchell returned the next day with authorization for all their conditions. The State Department clearly wanted their cooperation badly enough to agree to almost anything. The flight back to Washington was surreal. For months, Marcus had wondered if he'd ever see America again. Now he was flying first class on a government aircraft with full diplomatic protection. But the reunion with home was complicated. Marcus's family was overjoyed to see him, but they struggled to understand why he'd risked everything to expose military crimes. His parents had been proud of his military service and found it difficult to accept that the same military had tried to kill him. Rodriguez faced similar challenges with his family. His wife had supported him throughout the ordeal, but their children had been traumatized by months of uncertainty and fear for their father's safety. The congressional testimony began 2 weeks after their return. Marcus found himself sitting at a witness table in front of television cameras and a room full of politicians, journalists, and military officials. Some of the senators clearly viewed him as a hero who had risked everything to expose corruption. Others seemed to consider him a traitor who had damaged national security by revealing classified information. "Sergeant Chun," said Senator Williams, the committee chairman, "in your opinion, were the operations Commander Rodriguez documented necessary for American national security?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "No, sir. The targets were primarily civilians who posed no direct threat to American lives. The operations appeared to be motivated by political and economic interests rather than legitimate security concerns. But surely you understand that intelligence operations sometimes require actions that seem questionable to outsiders," pressed Senator Harrison, who had been critical of the investigation. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "But there's a difference between difficult decisions made through proper legal channels and illegal operations conducted without oversight or authorization." The hearing continued for 3 days. Rodriguez's testimony was more detailed and technical, describing specific operations and the documentary evidence he'd gathered. Together, their testimonies painted a picture of a rogue military unit that had operated like a private assassination squad. The public reaction was intense. Some Americans viewed them as heroes who had exposed government corruption at great personal risk. Others saw them as traitors who had damaged national security and emboldened America's enemies. Marcus tried to ignore the public debate and focus on the legal proceedings. Several high-ranking officers had been arrested based on the evidence he and Rodriguez had provided. The illegal operations had been shut down, and new oversight procedures were being implemented. But the victory felt incomplete. Many of the people responsible for the illegal operations had already retired or been transferred to positions where they couldn't be easily prosecuted. The investigation was focusing on operational details rather than the systemic problems that had allowed the operations to exist. 6 months after returning to the United States, Marcus received an offer to return to active duty with a promotion and assignment to a prestigious medical unit. Rodriguez received a similar offer to command a training battalion focused on ethics and legal compliance. They met for dinner to discuss their futures. Both men looked healthier than they had in months, but the stress of their ordeal was still visible. "Are you going to take the offer?" Marcus asked. "I'm thinking about it," Rodriguez replied. "The Army says they want leaders who will stand up for what's right. Maybe I can make a difference from inside the system." Marcus understood the appeal. They'd both spent their careers serving in the military, and it was difficult to imagine starting over in civilian life. "What about you?" Rodriguez asked. "I'm not sure," Marcus admitted. "Part of me wants to go back to being a medic and helping soldiers. But part of me worries that nothing has really changed." "Things have changed," Rodriguez said. "The oversight procedures are real, and there are consequences for illegal operations now. It may not be perfect, but it's better than it was." Marcus spent another week considering his options before making his decision. He would return to active duty, but with conditions. He wanted to work in a teaching hospital where he could train the next generation of combat medics. And he wanted the right to speak publicly about military ethics and accountability. The Army agreed to his conditions, recognizing the public relations value of having a respected whistleblower return to service. Rodriguez accepted command of the training battalion and immediately began implementing new curricula focused on legal and ethical decision-making. He was determined to ensure that future military leaders would be better prepared to recognize and resist illegal orders. The congressional investigation eventually resulted in significant reforms to special operations oversight. New procedures required congressional notification of all special operations, and independent inspectors general were assigned to monitor compliance. But some aspects of their story remained classified. The full extent of the illegal operations was never made public, and many of the foreign targets and operations remained secret. Marcus often wondered about the people who had died in the unauthorized missions he and Rodriguez had exposed. Their families would never know the truth about how their loved ones had been killed, and there would be no justice for their murders. Still, Marcus took satisfaction in knowing that they had prevented future crimes. The illegal operations had been shut down, and the people responsible were facing consequences for their actions. 2 years after their return, Marcus was promoted to warrant officer and given responsibility for training combat medics throughout the Army. Rodriguez had been promoted to colonel and was being considered for general officer rank. They still met regularly for dinner, sharing the unique bond of people who had risked everything together. The conversation inevitably turned to whether they had made the right choices. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked during one of their dinners. "Not for a second," Rodriguez replied without hesitation. "We did what we swore to do when we took our oath. We defended the Constitution against domestic enemies, even knowing the cost." Marcus pressed. "Especially knowing the cost," Rodriguez said. "The price of doing nothing would have been much higher. How many innocent people would have died if we hadn't stopped the illegal operations?" Marcus nodded. He'd reached the same conclusion himself, though it had taken time to feel confident about it. "What do you think our legacy will be?" Marcus asked. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "I think we'll be remembered as soldiers who put their duty to the Constitution above their careers and personal safety. That's a legacy I can live with." As they finished their dinner, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that day in Afghanistan when he'd treated Rodriguez's wounds. He'd saved the commander's life that day, never imagining that Rodriguez would save his soul by showing him what real courage looked like. The battle to expose the illegal operations was over. The war to maintain accountability and prevent future corruption would continue for the rest of their careers. But Marcus was ready for that fight, knowing that some battles were worth any price. 5 years had passed since the congressional hearings that exposed the illegal military operations. Marcus Chun, now Chief Warrant Officer, stood in front of a classroom full of young medics at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. He was teaching a course on medical ethics and the responsibilities of combat medics in morally complex situations. "The most important tool you carry isn't in your medical bag," Marcus told his students. "It's your ability to distinguish between lawful and unlawful orders, between ethical and unethical actions." One of the students raised her hand. "Sir, what do you do if you receive an order that you think is wrong?" Marcus paused, remembering a similar question he'd asked himself years ago in Afghanistan. You have a duty to question orders that violate the law or medical ethics. It's not always easy, and it may not make you popular, but it's your responsibility. After class, Marcus walked to his office and found a message waiting from Rodriguez, who was now Brigadier General Rodriguez and commanded a Special Operations Training Center in North Carolina. The message was brief. "Need to talk. Can you come to Bragg this weekend?" Marcus called Rodriguez immediately. "What's going on?" "Something you need to see in person," Rodriguez replied. "I can't discuss it over the phone." The tone in Rodriguez's voice was troubling. Marcus hadn't heard that level of concern since their days in hiding in Europe. "Is this about the old operations?" Marcus asked. "Related," Rodriguez said carefully. "But different. Can you get here by Saturday?" Marcus arranged for emergency leave and flew to North Carolina that Friday evening. Rodriguez met him at the airport, and Marcus immediately noticed the tension in his old friend's face. Thanks for coming, Rodriguez said as they drove toward the base. I wasn't sure who else I could trust with this. Trust with what? Marcus asked. Rodriguez waited until they were in his secure office on base before explaining. 3 weeks ago, one of my intelligence analysts brought me some disturbing information. It appears that the illegal operations we exposed weren't completely shut down. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? Some of the people involved in the original conspiracy escaped prosecution, Rodriguez explained. They've apparently reorganized under a different structure and resumed operations. Rodriguez showed Marcus classified intelligence reports describing recent assassinations in Eastern Europe and Africa that bore the hallmarks of the illegal operations they'd exposed years earlier. Same targeting criteria, same operational methods, same funding sources, Rodriguez said. It's like they learned from their mistakes and became more careful about covering their tracks. How is that possible? Marcus asked. The oversight procedures we recommended should have prevented this. The oversight procedures work for legitimate operations.